Welcome back to Care to CEO. And today we're talking about one of the least glamorous but most important parts of scaling a business. What's really happening behind the scenes? Because from the outside, growth can look exciting, more clients, more revenue, more visibility, more momentum. But internally, growth often exposes every weak spot in the business. And suddenly, communication breaks down, clients fall through the cracks, team members duplicate work, cash flow gets tighter, even though revenue is up. And the founder starts feeling like they're holding together a machine that's just moving way too fast. A lot of people think growth is the real goal, but healthy growth only happens when the back end of the business is strong enough to support it. So today, Crystal's breaking down the infrastructure every service-based founder needs to build if they really want growth that lasts, not growth that creates chaos. So Crystal's here. I'm excited to speak to her as always. And
As always, oh my goodness, yeah, it's been such a busy month. Getting back from Miami, getting back from Vegas, recording, and things are just they're definitely moving along. But I think today's topic is right on point with and aligning with what's happening in my life. So the business is growing. I'm expanding into new territories. But, if you don't have a strong infrastructure, then it really just exposes, your weak spots. So,
absolutely.
yeah, you definitely have to have systems in place to address that.
So perfect episode to really hop into this. We're going to go through a little bit about breaking down the infrastructure every service-based founder needs to really build if they want real growth that lasts and not growth that creates chaos. And I think at this point you are well versed
Absolutely.
in figuring out how to make things grow and last without
Yes.
creating chaos.
Absolutely, or learning to somehow maneuver through it. I've had to do it all at this point. So I think one of the mistakes that a lot of founders make is they think that um, the increased demand is actually like a sign of operational readiness, and that's not necessarily the case. So just because you might have more individuals coming in, it doesn't mean that everything's in order. Your systems and leadership sometimes can't support the growth if you haven't put certain things in place. And a good example of that is, let's say, you go from 10 to 20 individuals, but your hiring practices haven't changed. Well, now you're about to have a staffing issue, and so it doesn't matter that the growth is happening. You have your referrals may increase, but if the onboarding is inconsistent, then you're still going to be causing a lot of confusion and delays ultimately. Another issue there, with growth is just, oh my gosh, I've done this so much. Try to rely on your memory instead of putting a system in place. Oh my goodness, I've lost a lot. There's been quite a few pitfalls of with me trying to use my memory instead of a system that you can build that muscle memory because you have a system in place that you don't even need to think. You learn the system, you teach the system, and it's wash, rinse, repeat, over and over again. So, mhm.
Absolutely. And why do you think that so many businesses assume that they're ready for growth only to realize that the back end isn't supporting it? Is it like you said that the numbers are growing and they're gaining more clients, more
Well,
referrals?
because growth really ultimately reveals uh, your weakness. It exposes what's really weak. So I think that they don't have systems in place. I
Mhm.
mean, and I say this time and time again, somewhere probably in each episode, you can see that because it's the really hard lesson I had to learn from thinking I didn't need to put solid systems in place, and now I watch other founders do this, make these same mistakes. And I think that's ultimately, what really starts to cause business to crack or the infrastructure to crack.
Absolutely. What are some of the first signs that a company's infrastructure is starting to really begin to crack a little under growth?
I think that one of the biggest signs that a company's infrastructure is really starting to crack is, when and I've really, had this happen so many times, but the business is starting to feel heavier instead of operating smoothly. You find yourself working more and things aren't improving. For instance, answering calls, texts, and problems all day long. Been there, done that. Like spending what feels like an entire 24-hour day, just tending to things that I shouldn't have to. If your staff is consistently asking you questions instead of following a system that was put in place, that is a very big sign. Um, for instance, you have two staff that show up for the same shift. Meanwhile, there's another shift that is uncovered. There's an issue there in the infrastructure somewhere. There either wasn't a system put in place or someone didn't follow the system that was put in place. If you have, documentation that is inconsistent or constantly rushed, then there's definitely a crack. Um, and then another one, and this is one that I have absolutely a big lesson I've had to learn, but you know, money feels really tight, even though there's expansion happening. Like it's like, how does that even happen? But it does if you don't have, you know, if you have not created the proper sound infrastructure for your business.
Absolutely. And speaking about growing, I know one of the things that often seems like the business is growing, even if the infrastructure might be cracking a little, is revenue, right? So
Yeah.
you say that revenue can grow faster than operations. So why is that such a dangerous phase for founders?
So this is how things got started for me. Like this is literally my story, the start. Uh, Things moved very quickly, once I got licensed. W- Way quicker than I ever expected. I was not prepared for this huge growth. I was not prepared to go from one tax bracket to another. Especially without the full understanding of what that means. So essentially what happens is even though the revenue doubles, the problems double, the
Mhm.
call offs double, the stress doubles, and then your margins start to shrink because you're paying for the mistakes. That is a huge lesson for me. Um, you know, Bringing in seven figures plus, but because of things happening faster than you were prepared for, you're constantly, just paying and dishing out cash for mistakes that could have been prevented. Um, and I think, another issue that happens is, you're growing the income and you're growing the problems at the same rate or greater. So, that's why it's dangerous for the revenue to come in very quickly sometimes. It wouldn't seem that way. I never would have probably thought that if I would have experienced it.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. I agree completely. Like you wouldn't really expect those things. You see the revenue, you think that things are going in the right direction, but there's so many things that are happening behind the scenes. And behind the scenes, when people kind of refer to that as back end infrastructure, I
Right.
think most people tend to think it sounds corporate or it sounds complicated. I mean, it sounds complicated to me, but what does that actually mean for service businesses? Because it's not corporate. So how
No,
is that a little bit different?
no, but it's very similar,
Hmm.
to corporate. It really just means that this gives your business the ability to run consistently and smoothly without you always having to be the center of it. And that's why the back end infrastructure is so important. So, training people who know their roles without asking you, creating systems, that they help operate the business smoothly on a regular basis, from scheduling, communication, documentation, that run the same way every single time. This has just been oh my goodness. I think I bumped my head against the wall over this process quite a bit before I finally got it. Um, and another thing is, you have to create those clear steps for things like onboarding, the delivery of service, and how to re- how to effectively resolve an issue. You know, the same way each time. instead of, creating something. Don't get me wrong. I'm the queen of improvising, when it comes to business. And I know you have to sometimes, but essentially if there's a system in place, then you shouldn't have to deviate from that. An example is, if you were to step away for a week as the founder or CEO, the business should really still operate very smoothly. You should not, have this huge lump in your throat or anxiety build up if you have taught your staff and your team effective systems and built a back end infrastructure that is very strong.
Absolutely. And if there's someone listening now that feels like their business might be a little bit messy behind the scenes, where would you recommend that they start first? Would it be systems or people or technology? What would be the first step to clear that up?
I wouldn't say always start with technology. Technology can speed up the confusion if you haven't taken the time to first build the infrastructure correctly. And I've had that happen as well. I think you should first like first you should just start with the process, like mapping out how something should work effectively. Like take the time to learn how should it effectively work, and then and I mean, from start to finish, let's take client acquisition, for example, from the start of the referral to the intake process to the staffing of the client to the first day of services, what needs to happen through each of those steps? Map that out, train your team on how to do it. So now as the business is growing, we're going to continue to use this system that's put in place there. Assign a responsible person for each role, like keyword responsible person for each role. And then use tools to support it, not replace your thinking, but use tools. We have a documentation tool that we use, which is, very helpful so that no matter what staff member is working at whatever location, you can log in on your phone, you can put your notes in, you can say what happened or what you saw when you got on shift. It's going to record the time and, when you leave, something as simple as that. And a lot of these tools are, very either a cost effective or free. I mean, there's there's so many free tools today. So, I say, definitely don't rely on technology because you can also just automate your problems. I can't tell you how many times I paid for some expensive system, didn't use it, and before it's $300 a month coming out, and you totally forgot you even pay for this thing. So yeah, you definitely don't want to have issues like that. So, just do your due diligence to create
Absolutely. And you
effective
mentioned the
steps.
documentation tool. So, what are some of the most important back end systems every growing care or service business should really have in place?
So, I mean, when you have the right tools, like, oh my goodness, they make life so much easier. Um, I think some of the greatest ones that we use, we have a documentation tool that is kind of tailored to what we do in the home care industry. I think it's very effective. One that we have been using for a while, but we've switched to something else. And I've said this before, is Access Care. I think that was a really good starter system, very user friendly, and I think it's pretty cost effective. And this allows our staff to sign in and out, document. It allows us to keep records on file, and it is HIPAA regulated. So, we definitely like that one. I would say hiring system, where are you going and how are you, getting your staff? Uh, we did use Indeed. We still use Indeed, but there are other ones. But, just again, search there. There are certain onboarding systems. I mean, even your website. I mean, honestly, if you just have a really effective website, a lot of these tools can be implemented in your website, from potential clients just searching for you and starting the process of filling out an intake form, Um, and there are some other audit ready systems or documentation systems out there so that when it comes time for an audit, I mean, you're just like printing out the documents they need, So it's just, just search for them, but they are definitely out there and they really can be very beneficial.
Absolutely. And I know you've probably explored, like you said, so many different backend systems and different platforms and things like that. But how do you think that founders know when they're at that point, when they've outgrown spreadsheets and the manual processes and really doing everything themselves? Is there something, a particular time that you think clicks for that or for founders?
For sure. And I'm not going to say that I don't still shop around for effective uh, processes, automated processes right now, even because every day something new and better is coming out. So that it's hard to say that you just stay the same. But, when you find yourself constantly have to double check your work and double check things constantly, or you're misplacing forms. I mean, that's one of the biggest things. Forms and physical documents can be misplaced, and we've had that issue happen a lot. And I think it can cause sometimes the uh, increase in mistakes to occur because there's no structure. An example of that would be like payroll errors or missed visits and lost communication. So um, it's another thing is you just have to shop around for, to find what effectively works for you. But that's definitely when you know that you have outgrown the manual process is when there's the constant mistakes. But
Hmm.
I will say that I do still use the manual process. I
Hmm.
mean, because sometimes it is helpful to have that backup. And even though we'll still store the documents, properly, sometimes you still find yourself using
The
those. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we talked about the back end structure, but let's talk a little bit about the team structure. So, how important do you think it is for role clarity and accountability when a company does start to scale?
Okay. So I think scaling requires people to own their outcomes and not just tasks. An example is if scheduling fails, who's responsible? You know, so and that's why we have to put the right people in the right roles. Because a lot of times nobody wants to take accountability, when something happens. So that's why there are the right people in the right places. You need to set, clear roles, and that eliminates the confusion and overlap. My grandma always talked about too many cooks in the kitchen, you know, so I'm very big on that. We don't need too many cooks in the kitchen. Um, and accountability really creates a consistency in performance. And I've noticed this when there were times where I had this large team, even as far as management goes, and it just seemed like there were so many people, but nothing was getting done. And it's like, what is going on? There's so many people on payroll. Why are things not happening? And honestly, that's something that I had to take accountability for. That was because the right people weren't in the right places. And so now, we make sure that that happens.
Absolutely. And that's what we mentioned earlier, too, like duplicating work for some people, because some people could be doing the same things as someone else. And then the other task that needs to be addressed isn't getting done at all. So I see how
Absolutely.
clarity and that structure would be really important. And what would you say in terms of metrics or numbers? What metrics or numbers do you think a CEO should be watching regularly to really know whether the back end is healthy?
So, I want to say that if you don't track it, then you're guessing. And I've had moments of embarrassment where someone's asking me, it could be a potential investor or someone interested in partnering, whatever the case. They're asking me, about numbers and metrics, and I really had no idea. And that's not something that's hard to do, especially when you're new. So, I definitely want to give new founders grace in that area. but definitely it's something that you need to be tracking. So staffing coverage, you know, are all the shifts filled consistently? Turnover rates, the cash flow and the timing of it. When money actually hits your account, like, you need to know, all those metrics and outcomes. The service consistency, uh, how many, missed visits or incomplete documentation, KPIs,
Hmm.
and then a good example also is, when the revenue looks good, but the cash is late, and then ultimately the operation in itself suffers. So it's very important. And then again, just like we've been, talking out throughout this entire show today, there are tools. There are tools, and for me, there are people. So this is one of those things where I let those in that lane assist me. I am not an accountant. I am not
Right.
a tax specialist. So those are the kind of people that have to exist on my team, to really also help me effectively understand what's happening in the business. And so that's a hat I happily took off. I'm a part of the process, and I understand what's going on, but it's also because I have people assist me in that area.
I think that that's important. I think that kind of goes back to something we said even last season early on about really knowing what needs to be done and then knowing where to delegate it, because there's just some things that someone can do better or is better suited for someone else's role, but you just need to know that it's moving properly and moving around as it should, but
Absolutely.
knowing what to delegate and not to what to
Right.
do yourself.
Absolutely.
No, completely. And for the founder listening now who wants to really grow this year, what do you think is one back end improvement that they could make this week that would really have an immediate impact?
Definitely don't overwhelm yourself, trying to fix everything at one time. You really, I mean, you could just give yourself like some serious health issues when you think about all the things that need done, and it seems like a huge mountain. So just don't do it all at one time. Just do little by little and get the proper help and guidance. That's what I ultimately had to get guidance in these areas. I said, I got enough to do. I can't play all these roles, anymore. Um, and pick one broken process at a time, whether it's like onboarding or schedule, and just week by week, just pick one thing
Mhm.
and improve it and set a better, system in place for that. And I think ultimately you'll find that very quickly you'll come out of, whatever issues that you have, and you'll improve overall.
And as a founder, you wear so many hats that now your backend infrastructure is solid, and it's important for all founders to get there. And now, especially for you, you have so many different things going on. So it's good that you at this point have all your back end infrastructure handled and your teams in place, because I know you've been traveling so much back and forth to Miami. You're working on some kind of show, which I want to hear more about. So what's going
Yes.
on with that?
So I went to Miami to record a docu series that'll be on Prime. So be on the lookout for that. Where just different women in business, and I don't even think that it's always women in business, but just women that are, in the community doing different things. And you get to hear our stories. Actually, I believe when I was there, they told me that they even interviewed Serena Williams. So I was like, wow.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, just be on the lookout for that. It'll be on Prime, and I'll give updates as I know when that episode drops as well. And I'm definitely also still working with new clients. So if you are in need of services in structuring your business, scaling, reach out, and we'll provide that information.
I'm definitely so excited. You'll have to keep us updated and let us know when we can see that on Prime, because I know I can't wait to watch that. And
I
it's kind
definitely
of
will.
ironic too, because we touched on this. I think it was the last episode about how service service businesses can start small, but then they grow, and there's so many things beyond just the
So many
service
things.
business that It can lead
I
to like,
and I'm still like, that is what's happening right now. I am just, the last one I was talking about being blown away, like constantly with people sharing what they do as far as service-based businesses or their service-based agencies or just in the home care space. And I continue. Let's just so you know, it continues because as I'm speaking to people on a national level, who are, you know, operating their agencies or founders all over the place, I'm just like, I never even knew that you can do these different things. So I'm really, that is that continues to just amaze me and excite me and really drive me because I do this for my the people I work with, the people that I consult, so that they have resources and I can say, hey, you know, did you know you can do this, you know, in your state? So again, very exciting.
yeah, lots of good stuff going on. You have to definitely keep us updated on that as well. And I think also this was such an important conversation of how you really got to have your business down packed so that you can move on and do all these other things and all these other ventures. So, and you never stop. You're always finding something new to take on. So,
It's just the excitement. I mean, it's like this journey that just keeps going and I can't help it.
absolutely. No, it's amazing. And I think this conversation was such an important reminder that growth isn't just about what the world sees, but it's a lot of what goes on behind the scenes. So just because more clients and more revenue and more opportunity only becomes wins when the infrastructure exists to support them. So
Yeah.
perfect example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to add to that the strongest businesses aren't the loudest. They're the most structured behind the scenes. So there's
Absolutely.
nothing wrong with that.
Mhm. The strongest companies definitely aren't always the loudest. They're often the most operationally sound. And for a lot of founders, that means success isn't just about selling more, it's about building better. So,
Absolutely.
perfect conversation for that. And if today's episode really helped you think differently about what real growth requires, make sure that you're subscribed to Care to CEO so you never miss the next conversation with Crystal. Always good episodes and good conversations and never a shortage. There's a lot more conversations to happen and I'm always intrigued and interested in learning about all the new things that you're working on. So make sure make sure to include that in the next episode too because I want to hear more about
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and until next time, everyone, keep building, keep leading, and keep becoming the CEO your growth requires. It's amazing speaking to you as always, Crystal. It's always a pleasure, and I cannot
Always a pleasure.
see you soon.